What will be Taysom Hill's role on the 2022 New Orleans Saints? That's a question going into this season for this offense. What are we going to see out of number 7 after the comments he made at Tuesday's practice? Some people were a little bit worried about whether or not he's all in. I'll talk about what he said, whether or not I think it's a big deal, and what I think we'll see from Taysom Hill. All that coming up on this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
So this time last year, the New Orleans Saints were having a quarterback battle between Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill. We all kind of assumed that Jameis Winston would win that battle because, if we're just being honest about it, he is a legitimate NFL quarterback. And in Taysom Hill's situation, it's a little bit more complex. Could he be an NFL quarterback? Maybe someday, but you're almost putting in that work and overanalyzing every single throw that I have during a game. And I think if you get to the point where you have to analyze every single throw that your quarterback makes over the course of an NFL game, then maybe they're just not a starting quarterback. And that's okay. That's fine. Because at the end of the day, for a guy like Taysom Hill, he's still a really good football player. And I think that's what he can be for this version of the New Orleans Saints. So let's get right into it here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook and Maker's Mark, and part of the Boot Crew Media Network. Taysom Hill on Tuesday was asked about his role. Now, with Jameis Winston kind of sidelined right now with that foot sprain, there's a bigger opportunity for other players to really get a chance to speak to the media. Taysom Hill was very involved in Tuesday's practice, got to actually throw a couple of passes as a quarterback. We saw him blocking for special teams drills. We saw him catching passes from Andy Dalton as one of the top tight ends on the depth chart. So he kind of did it all at Tuesday's practice. And while he was speaking to the media, he was asked about his role. Remember last year, it was a QB battle. Sean Payton had them going head to head, and there was talks about, hey, maybe he can win the starting job. And he ultimately started some games last year, but that was because of Jameis getting hurt and Simeon getting hurt. And I mean, let's be real. Every quarterback in the Saints roster played a game last year. So that isn't the case for this season. Taysom Hill's working in at that Swiss Army knife type of role with a little bit of an emphasis on tight end. And when he was asked about it, he said, things aren't up to me. I'm willing to do what I need to do to help us win football games. I love playing, and so it creates opportunities for me to add value and be on the field and compete. That's the nature of the NFL. This isn't necessarily what I want. It's what's best for the team, and I'm good with that. Now, a lot of people lost their mind over that quote, and the reason they lost their mind over that quote is because, I'll give him credit, Mike Florio and the Pro Football Talk team did a good job of kind of baiting you with the headline, because the headline that went viral was him saying, role isn't necessarily what I want, but it's best for the team. And when you hear that, you think of someone being salty or not happy with their current role and whether or not they'll play a factor into the locker room. And if that could linger, should the Saints trade him? I saw fans going way in on this quote, way in. I mean, people were overanalyzing this quote all day on Tuesday. And I think there's two parts of it, right? Not putting and I'm good with that part is a big part of it. Because if you take that out, then it does make Taysom Hill look completely salty and not all in on the Saints. But if you throw that in there, that definitely helps. But then when you add in the fact that he says, I'm willing to do what I need to do to help us win football games. I love playing, and so it creates opportunities for me to add value and be on the field and compete. Taysom Hill, as he said right there, wants to be on the football field. Now, would he like to play quarterback? Yes, but you know what? We can't always get what we want. I'm sure some of you are sitting here watching this podcast and saying, man, I wish I had $1 million. It doesn't happen like that. So for Taysom Hill's situation, sometimes you got to live with it. And some people talked about whether or not he'd be okay with this role and going back to that Swiss Army knife thing. My question to you would be, if let's say he wasn't okay with this role, which NFL team today would be like, hey, we're going to go trade for Taysom Hill. We're going to put him in our offense. We'll find a role for him. Which team is going to do that right now, knowing that he is a little bit on the pricier side for a weapon? I mean, he's not, on a rookie contract. The Saints are paying him a decent amount of money, knowing that he does unfortunately have an injury history, and also knowing that the Saints are the team that really discovered Taysom Hill and figured out what to do with him. Started with the Packers. They used him primarily as a quarterback. Sean Payton saw him, said, hey, we could get something out of him. Now, Sean maybe saw a little bit too much because he went in on the Steve Young comparisons, and I never agreed with any of that. But the Saints know how to use Taysom Hill better than any other team. Which team right now would go after him? So the idea that, hey, he's not all in, let's trade him. Anyone thinking that, I think you should really just stop thinking that, because I think that's just not going to happen. And it's also a little ridiculous. And the second part of this is, just because he may not be all in on not being a quarterback, right? Like he wants to be a quarterback deep down. If it was that important, he would request a trade, would have tried to get out this offseason. The Saints could have worked something out. So I'm not worried about that. As for what I expect his role to be, I still think Taysom Hill, as long as he's healthy, will play a big role on this football team because I think, whether or not people want to admit it, he's a good football player. And a lot of people have really argued about, hey, I better not see him taking quarterback snaps this season. It's Jameis's team. It is Jameis's team. No one's going to deny that, right? Like when you ask people who's the leader in the locker room, every single one on the offensive side of the football will tell you Jameis Winston. And there's no exception. He's always the guy that people point to when you say, hey, who's the leader on the offensive side of the football? Always Jameis Winston. But Taysom Hill can still serve value to this team as a pass blocker, as a tight end, as a runner, as a special teams player. And I know people don't like the idea of him taking snaps under center, but my rebuttal to that would be, until we know that QB power does not work, you might as well keep using it. Because I think there are times last year where people forget the QB power play package that the Saints have really done with Taysom Hill for the last couple of years. That was kind of their way to ice games at some points earlier in the season. I think of the Patriots game in week 3, Taysom Hill pretty much put that game on ice. Now, I'm not saying he won them that game. He just put it on ice. And I think for New Orleans, we talk about that running back room, right? We know what we got in Alvin Kamara. We think Mark Ingram's got gas left in the tank. But then there's a lot of, I would say question marks. Malcolm Brown, what is he? Dwayne Washington, is he really just a special teams player? I would believe so, but we'll see. Abram Smith, undrafted rookie out of Baylor, still has to prove himself. Tony Jones Jr. looked great last preseason, and that's pretty much all we saw. So I think this running game can use a lift. Adding Taysom Hill, sprinkling him in from time to time on QB power plays into short yardage situation, a fourth down situation, red zone situation, that's helping your football team. And maybe you don't like it because you don't want to see him near that quarterback position. But I'm not asking him to throw the football. I'm strictly asking him to be the bulldozer that he can be, and we've seen it time and time again. And I think this comes down to us trying to figure out and balance the idea of him getting snaps in that position where we know he's primarily running and not doing what Sean Payton did, which was overusing him at times. And what I mean by that is I think of week 4 against the Giants, Jameis Winston throws a beautiful deep ball to Kenny Stills, touchdown, but it gets called back, holding on Adam Troutman. Very next play, Sean Payton puts Taysom Hill in to throw a deep pass, which Jameis Winston just did to perfection. Taysom Hill basically throws a jump ball to Deontay Hardy. That gets intercepted. That stuff has to get thrown out, right? Putting him in there to make him throw, especially deep, that stuff's got to go. But at times, if it's a really quick short pass or a screen pass, which the Saints were working on Tuesday, I could see them sprinkling it. I'm not saying they should, but I could see them doing that. But I'm looking at Taysom Hill as A, can you bring value in that QB power offense? And B, what can you do as a tight end? I think he's getting better and better each day. You're seeing him kind of, expand the route tree a little bit. We're seeing him go downfield a little bit more. I think there's value for Taysom Hill. And I think for the Saints, when we look at their offense and we talk about Michael Thomas being healthy and Jarvis Landry being added and Chris Olave being part of the team, someone's going to get lost in the shuffle in a good way, right? Because you can't account for everyone on defense. And if I go out there and I'm the Saints and Michael Thomas is lined up and Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara, they're all lined up, Taysom Hill's not going to be on their kind of watch list. He's not going to be someone that they're looking out for. We must stop Taysom Hill. And that could open the door for him to have some games where we look back and we say, man, Taysom really did a good job today. And I think that's possible. And this isn't about being some type of Taysom Hill apologist because this is football. If you can't cut it, you're off the roster. I just still think there's a lot of value for him right now on this team. I know some people like to make the jokes about him and Sean Payton, and whenever Sean comes back to the NFL, send Taysom over there. Whatever that may be, I think there's like a deep-rooted hate for some reason for Taysom Hill. He's a very controversial subject among the Saints community. I still think there's value with him as an offensive playmaker, and I can't stress that enough. This is Jameis Winston's team. Jameis Winston's QB1 as long as he's healthy. And if Jameis Winston isn't healthy, Andy Dalton will be QB1. Not throwing Taysom's hat into that ring at all. But man, if the Saints play their cards right, and I think Pete Carmichael can, because I think for Pete Carmichael, there's not this attachment to prove everyone wrong with Taysom Hill. It's just finding the best role for him. I think there's a chance and a door and a path for him to really come in and make some noise as an offensive playmaker. And I say the attachment part because I think deep down with Sean Payton, whether or not people wanted to admit it, there was always that motive that if I turn this man into starting quarterback, look at me. Like I found him on the Packers. He was an undrafted guy out of BYU. I said he was going to be the next Steve Young, and I did that. It didn't work out that way, but I always felt like deep down, there's always something to prove there. Pete Carmichael is just trying to put together the best possible offense because it's his chance to run the show now. And I think he can do that. So I'm expecting a much more high-flying offense with Pete Carmichael, a little bit more play action, kind of play to Jameis Winston's strengths. But I think the Saints would be silly if they didn't use Taysom Hill. So when I see that quote that came out on Tuesday and I see people freaking out on it, I would just say, pump the brakes. This is a valuable player to this team. And like I said, there's 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and QB power. And until QB power gets stopped, it remains a certainty. And as long as it remains a certainty, the Saints should probably use it because every yard counts in the NFL. And for this Saints offense, when you have such a good defense on the other side, stringing along lengthy drives, which you can do, especially when you're beaten down in those third-yard situations, you're picking up those first and keeping the chains moving, that'll go a long way for you to reach your goal. So I'm not in on the whole Taysom Hill. It's not bought in on the Saints, figure out a way to move him, and he's salty. I think, there is a sting that comes with not being able to achieve your ultimate dream. But if it stung that much, I think he'd just be another Tim Tebow out of the league because he wasn't willing to play other positions. Taysom Hill's willing to play whatever position the Saints throw at him. Whether he likes it or not, he's going to do it. And I think for us fans, I think we just have to commend whatever he does this season as long as he's doing a good job. And I kind of think he will because there won't be a lot of pressure on him. It's going to be a totally different role. But I'm curious to know what you guys think about this whole Taysom Hill thing. Were you upset about his comments? Did you think it was a lot? Did you think it was a little? Obviously, you can see from my perspective, I think people are making a little bit too big of a deal out of this. If you read the full quote and you get all the context out of it, it is different. You're going from a QB battle and a chance to achieve your ultimate dream to you're back to that Swiss Army knife role. But, and we all know this, that's where he's at his best. Like, I look back at the 2019 season, and granted that playoff run was a failure. They got bounced by Minnesota. Who was the best player on the field that day? It was Taysom Hill without a doubt. He was the best player on the field for the Saints on offense. And you don't have to like Taysom, but that's the truth. And I think if you can get that type of player, maybe the snap count not as high, but that type of player in this offense with a returning Michael Thomas, who looks great right now in camp, we're changing our thoughts on this Saints team because we were so, hell-bent on saying this is a defense-first team, and they still will be, I think. But if this offense holds their weight and they start balancing out this thing, sky's the limit for a team like this. So, again, curious to know what you guys think about Taysom Hill, and what would you like to see his role this year? Do you want him to be primarily tight end? Do you want him to be that Swiss Army knife? That's what I think he's best at. I think that's where you're going to get the most value out of him. But I'm always curious to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.